like to mark our invitation song tonight. It will be song number 939. 939. Oh, why not tonight? We will sing the first and fourth verse. I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry, from the waters lifted me, now safe am I. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. Souls in danger, look above. Jesus completely saves. He will lift you by his love out of the angry waves. He's the master of the sea, billows his will obey. He, your Savior, wants to be saved today. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me.
Teachers can go to their classes.
Would everybody please turn with me to song number 414, Anywhere with Jesus, 414. We will sing the first and fourth verse. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Anywhere he leads me in this world below. Anywhere without him dearest joys would fade. Anywhere with Jesus I am not afraid. Anywhere, anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Anywhere with Jesus I can go to sleep. When the darkening shadows round about me creep, knowing I shall wake and never more to roam. Anywhere with Jesus will be home, sweet home. Anywhere, anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go.
Thank you, Jackson. Great job being throwing a curveball there and dealing with it well. Tonight we have Jesse Claunch from Century Church of Christ. He's going to speak to us tonight about Christian and work ethic. And I think it'll be an interesting topic. Jesse has been at Century for 7 years. He's a graduate of Faulkner University and Memphis School of Preaching. I've had a chance to listen to him many times. Oh, yeah, children to your classes, sorry. We might as well go ahead and, he handled it much better than I did. Let's let the children go. Sorry about that. What's that? Yeah. Jesse brought his wife, Kim, with him, and their 4 sons, so they're the exact opposite of Sheena and I. And they're all stair steps just like ours. The oldest one is 8, and the youngest one is 1. Okay. Yep, it's exciting. 4 girls is bad enough. I can't imagine 4 boys, day in and day out. So I've gotten to know Jesse quite well over the years, and I consider him a good friend, but I think you're going to enjoy his topic tonight, and please give him your attention.
I'd rather have the 4 boys than the 4 girls. So, but it is a pleasure to be here again with each of you. I think this is probably the 3rd or 4th year that I've been coming here for your summer series, and I'm very delighted to be able to come down. This wasn't the first topic I chose. I really chose. I forget who it was that got the first one, but this was my second running-up choice. And it gave me a chance to look into this topic or this thought in a way that I guess I really hadn't before, or hadn't been able to dig into it the way I feel that I am now, or at least prepared I am now to give this. And this is the thought of the work ethic and a Christian, and how we as Christians approach not just our spiritual self, but how we approach our physical jobs, and really how we approach any daily tasks that we are presented with, that we face in life. And as Christians, we have an opportunity when it comes to our jobs, when it comes to, again, just the daily tasks that we go about, we have an opportunity to present Christ and present God to these people that they might just think it's another job, or they might just think this is just a hobby that I have. But we as Christians, the way we approach these things, we can speak volumes to these people that might not contact God, or might not come in contact with religion in any other way, but that fleeting contact I might have at work or at play. So we as Christians, how do we approach this? First of all, we must understand that man is a being that's created not for leisure, not for sleep, not just for eating, but as a being that is created for work. And you might disagree with me, but think about this for a second. In Genesis chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, God has created what we call paradise or Eden. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there He put the man whom He had formed, and out of the ground made the Lord to grow every kind of tree that was pleasant in sight, good for food. This garden that was beautiful, that was a place of ease and comfort for Adam and Eve. But guess what God made him do when He put him in this place of paradise, this place of great good? And the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. Now, can you imagine God created this beautiful place? Now He put man in it and said, now you've got to work. You've got to dress it, you've got to keep it. We've got to realize that even in the perfect circumstance, man needs something to do in order to keep our minds active, to keep us working and living and functioning the ways that we do. Not to say that vacation or time off isn't a needed thing as well, but He said God's putting him here to dress it and to keep it. In Galatians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, it says, "Let us not be weary in well sleeping, well resting, well doing. For in due season we shall reap if we faint not. As we have therefore the opportunity to let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith." Most often we attach this, or connect it, rightly so, with the spiritual aspect. I can't be lazy when it comes to spreading the gospel, when it comes to working the works of God. but this is also a true statement when it comes to our jobs or the things that we approach physically. I can't be weary in doing. I can't expect to reap when I'm not sowing, or if I faint, I can't expect to be able to go out and to reap a harvest. God expects and has set into, I guess, the natural order of this world, a thought that we have to put forth some effort in order to survive physically. Then in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10, for we are His workmanship. We are the craft made by God, created in Christ Jesus, unto what? Sleeping. Eating. No, created unto good works which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. Again, spiritual context that's being mentioned here, but it applies to our physical actions as well. We are the workmanship of God, therefore should I just abound in spiritual goods and my boss think I'm the lazy one? Think I'm the one that, you give him a job and he's never going to do it? It's a way we can show that we are different from the rest of the world by showing that we have, again, the thought, a good work ethic. We've got to realize that man is created to work. But that desire to work also brings something with it that some in the world might see as a negative thing. Is man's desire to gain physical goods, or that should say physical goods, good or evil? I didn't look at it. I didn't work diligently to show it there. But you get the thought. Is that desire to work, to gain, to have money, to have a car, to have a house, to have nice things, is that in and of itself a bad thing? Well, first of all, think of the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25, 14 through 30. Not going to read the whole thing, but go back and read it at some point and think about the parable that's given there. Here we have this master giving out certain amounts of money to his servants. These people are supposed to take that money to grow it, to prosper with it. Two of them do. The last one does not. It's taken away from him, given to the one that prospers the most. And he even says to that last servant, why didn't you just go put it in the bank or go put it and let me gain usury or interest from it? The thought is that God or Christ would not have used that parable if gaining money or earning wealth is a bad thing. Also, if you would, turn over to James chapter 4. And this passage is one that stuck out on my mind more so or mostly so for this thought. James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. So if somebody gets there, if you would very loudly read those verses. James 4, 13 through 17. Now, often we use this passage, especially verse 14, to talk about the brevity of life. But the thought here is we have some people that are going to a city. They're going to stay there a year, buy, sell, and get gain. Right now, if that was the sinful part, that would have just been condemned right there. But notice what's condemned is not the buying, the selling, the making gain, but it's the fact that you're not putting God in your plans while you're doing it. He says, here's what the evil boastings is. It's saying you're going to do it yourself, or you're going to do it alone, or you're going to do it for your own purposes, but God's not a part of it. Again, that thought would not have been used if the gain was the evil to begin with. But also you think about some people in our world, even back in their time, that try to skip the working. They try to beat the system or handle the system in order to make gain. When I was in college at Faulkner, I was part of a social club, and my, job there was that I was supposed to find us works that we could do for the community or things that we could do, bagging groceries for people or helping people move or things like that. One of the things that I found was University Church of Christ, which was right there by Faulkner, they had what they called Panama boxes. they would buy these little shoe boxes, and they'd fill them full of toys and crayons and things like that to send over to Panama. Well, when I got there, I was waiting for the receptionist to give me the boxes, and while we were there, a lady came in, and she was asking them for money. And the lady looked at her in the face and said, essentially, you need to get out of here. And me and my educated, well-known self at 18 essentially thought, how in the world could you turn somebody away? Here's somebody maybe wanting to feed their family. Come to find out, this lady had her rounds that she would make to different churches or congregations, and that was her week to make it to that place. Some people just try to get the gain without putting any effort or any work into it. Again, that's where it moves from the good to I'm doing this for evil purposes or the wrong intent behind it. Some, though, try to skip this. But also in 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 10, we have this command. This we command you, that if any should not work, neither should he eat. Now, that right there, if we just had that one passage, that would essentially cover our topic of Christian work ethics. That we as Christians, if I'm not going to put any effort or work or desire into things physically, then I should not get any return. Now, that's barring the thoughts that Christ gives and His apostles give later on about if somebody's in need or they can't feed themselves or they're physically disabled, we provide for them. But the thought is, if I am able and I choose not to work, then I shouldn't eat as well. Man's desire for physical things isn't bad in and of itself. It isn't an evil thing. But as we'll see at the end of the lesson, it's really the intent, the thought, or the heart behind that gain that makes it an evil or sinful thing. The first thing really that I want us to talk about is an attitude that permeates our society, but sadly it's not just our society. We see it back in the New Testament, the Old Testament, and sadly it's going to exist long after all of us are gone if the world continues. And it's this attitude of give me. That for some reason I am owed something because of maybe who I am or what I expect society to give to me. The Jews, as a nation, as a people, had this national concept of having a mind to work. They were what we would call a hard-working people. They had a work ethic that demanded they not be lazy or they not be unprofitable, but they worked. But then when Christianity came to the Greeks had a completely different mindset. Their idea, the only good work is work that I don't have to do. It's the work that I get my workers to do, or I get my slaves to do, or something that just falls into my lap. Again, we see that in our society. We're losing that mindset of working and earning and gaining for ourselves. But instead, it's what do I expect the government to give me? What do I expect this congregation to give me if I go over there and ask them for it? What do I expect the world to give me just because I exist? Think about the difference between this attitude that we see nowadays and 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. You think back to the 1940s, the 1950s, not to say there weren't people there that had the same attitude, but as a society as a whole, it was more this attitude, I'm going to work for what I deserve. But now we have millions, billions of dollars just in our nation being given out to people that have the mindset, it's owed me, it's due to me. Again, not to take away from the people that can't physically do these things or they need the money to survive, but it's these people that are able-bodied, that have the ability to work, but instead choose to say, I'd rather have just somebody give it to me. People today have the mindset, again, what we just said, that stuff is owed to them. Ephesians 4 and verse 28, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him, again, go back to our phrase, sleep, eat. All right? Sit around and watch TV all day. No. Again, it's that thought, let him labor. Let the person that's gaining dishonestly, let the person that's gaining physically in wrong ways, let that person stop those actions and start working for what they need or what they have to have in order to survive. 1 Thessalonians 4, we're going to be looking at this passage later on, but 1 Thessalonians 4, 10 through 12 here, we beseech you, brethren, that you increase more and more, and and to do your own business, and to work with your own hands, as we command you, that you may walk, how? Honestly toward them that are without, and that ye may have lacking nothing. The thought here again is he's beseeching not the community as a whole to provide for it, but he's saying, I'm beseeching you, that individual, those singular Christians, as a group, yes, but he's speaking to the individual in this thought, to do with your, again here, own business, to work with your own hands, as we've commanded, so you can walk honestly. The idea here is that you provide for yourself so that the world can look at you and not see a leech, not see somebody that just give me, help me, but sees a person that, hey, maybe I should model myself after this person. They might not be gaining in leaps and bounds, but they've got what they need to survive. They've got what they need to make it day to day, that you may lack nothing. Again, the idea, working with our own hands, at our own business, at our own labors to gain these things. But now, if you would, Proverbs has a lot to say about a lot of different topics. And this thought, sluggard, lazy individual, is talked about quite often in the Proverbs. And I just want to look at a few of these. I think there's about 4 or 5 here that I listed. But you could probably find about 20 of these thoughts that are given toward the sluggard. First of all, the sluggard, the lazy individual, the person with a poor work ethic, refuses to work. Proverbs 20 and verse 4, the sluggard will not plow by reasons of the cold, therefore shall he beg and harvest having nothing. The sluggard says, well, I don't want to go out to work today. It's too cold, it's too hot, it's raining too much, or I'll have to fix something on the plow, or I'll have to get yelled at by my boss at work, or I've got this deadline I'm facing and I'd rather go fish. Makes up the reason. And therefore, when it comes time to pay the bills, when it comes time to feed the family, they don't have anything, so they have to beg for it. Also, you see, they love, now, notice the word in the middle, loves excess sleep. Now, I don't know about you, but I love sleep. I have 4 boys. Where's Oscar go? Do you love sleep with 4 girls? Do they keep you? Every time you can. But it's the thought excess sleep there. That I'm not looking for what I need to get by, or I'm not needing that nap in the afternoon, but it's this idea that I'm going to go to bed at 8 and I'm going to sleep till 2 in the afternoon every day. Not excess sleep. The slothful casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. That I am putting off my work, putting off my job, putting off things that need to get done, just so I can sleep a little bit longer. But also we see they're great wasters. In Proverbs 18 and verse 19, he also that is slothful in his work is brother to him that is a great waster, or is kin to this thought. So if I'm a slothful, if I'm a sluggard type person, I'm going to not worry about making sure that I keep what I can. An example of this is, I forget where I read this, but it was a college student, I think it was, that was so lazy or so much of a sluggard, she decided, I'm not going to have dishes anymore. I'm just going to eat out of the can, or I'm going to get a paper towel and put everything on. I don't want to wash dishes, so that's the way I'm going to eat. Now, that might not be a bad idea occasionally, but you have your parents over. You're not going to eat out of a bean can, are you? You get the thought with that, though. It's the idea that I'm going to waste something, or I'm going to go beyond what's rational just so I can save a little money, just so I can save a little sleep, just so I can... The idea of the slothful is going to look for the simplest way, the cheapest way to accomplish these things. But also, if you would, turn over to Proverbs chapter 24. We see also that they destroy their own homes. Not that they take a bat, or not that they take a sledgehammer or a cart or their home, but they destroy it nonetheless. So again, if somebody would get that, Proverbs 24, 30 through 34. Not everybody at once. So here we're given the thought in Proverbs that it's not this rapid thing, not physically destroying his own property, but he allows it to fall away just through his own neglect. As verse 33 puts it, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little bit of looking for rest, and therefore things fall apart. Now, I'm sad to say, if you came by my house probably, what was it, a week and a half ago, you would see a little bit of this, not because I was sleeping, but I just didn't have time to cut my grass. It was probably waist high in some places. But it was because all the rain that came through. Then we had Bible camp. Then we had, I think, 2 funerals that went through. I just didn't have time to cut my grass, but you get the thought. Don't we all have those little corners of our yard maybe, or those little things in our house that we've meant to do and just haven't done, and that just get pushed to the back of your mind? But you see, that's the whole mindset here of this sluggard, of this slothful man. I don't want to do any of it. Not going to take care of my yard, not going to take care of my fences, not going to take care of this or that, and therefore things just fall in. How many of you have seen a house that maybe 10, 15 years ago looked beautiful, but then the family moved out, or maybe it was foreclosed upon, and the house just sat there with nobody in it? A lot can happen. It can fall down pretty quickly. There's a house by my mother-in-law's that was taken over, I think, because of a road project, and I think in 2 years, the house, or the roof fell in on it, just because nobody was there to keep up with it. Here's what the sluggard does. Here's what the slothful man does. They destroy because they'd rather be doing something else of their own. Because, again, going to our thought here, they have the attitude of, somebody else is going to do it for me. Somebody else is going to take care of this issue or this problem for me, because that's what I think should happen to me. Because I'm owed it, because it's due me, or however you want to phrase that thought. We as Christians cannot have this attitude of, give me. We've got to have the attitude that Christ did, the attitude that we see in the Old Testament, the New Testament, of men and women that were willing to go out and work, put their hand to the plow, so to speak. We've got to be willing to work, not just for us physically, yes, that's a requirement, but also so we can be that good example for God. The next thought we look at, so what is our work ethic? As a Christian, how do I approach life then? I know I don't want to be that person that's a sluggard, that person that is the give me attitude, so what do I do? First of all, let's go over, if you would be turning to Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah. We're going to look at a few verses here, but there's a whole context here that I think helps us quite a bit when understanding how God expects His people to work. In Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 6, then in verses 17 and 18, we'll read this in just a second. But while this was going on, the walls of Jerusalem had not been built. These people were being lazy. They were working on their own things, not worried about the security of the city. There were the nations around them that were trying to destroy them, trying to attack them, trying to intimidate them not to do this. But listen, so built we the wall, for the people had here's that phrase that we've heard a lot. People had a mind to work. The wall was built, it was accomplished because these people had the mindset, I want to get it done. Now, sometimes some jobs are hard enough to get done just on their own, but listen to what's here in verses 17 and 18. They which builded it on the wall, and they which bear the burdens, with those that laid it or carried or were the workers, everyone with one of his hands wrought in the work, and the other hand held a weapon. Now think about this. They had a mind to work even while people were against them. Armies were coming against them. Right after that in Nehemiah, we see that those that were trying to intimidate them were gathering an army to come against them. So here they are building with one hand and then holding a sword with the other, protecting themselves with the other. For the builders and everyone had his sword girded by his side, and so he builded. So you think about it, they had a mind to work, didn't they? They had the mindset, nothing is going to stop us from getting this task done. Do we as Christians, do we approach life that way? Do I approach life with the ethic of, I have a mind to work? That it doesn't matter if people are against me, it doesn't matter what opposition I might face, I am going to get it done. And I'm going to make sure that I do it as quickly as possible. If I'm not mistaken, I believe they accomplished this feat of building the wall or finishing it in around 50 days. So here they are, tasked with building this wall, facing an army, facing insurrection from the nations around them, and they got it done. We must face life in this same manner. But as we've looked at, we've seen several of these thoughts. We as Christians have an instruction, a commandment by God that we are supposed to be people not of ease, not of being lazy, but people that work. In Colossians 3 and verse 23, whatsoever you do, do it heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men. How many of you have heard a preacher before use the phrase, if you're a ditch digger, you be the best ditch digger you can be? Because you're not digging that hole for your employer, you are, but you're digging it for God. You're an office worker, you're a truck driver, you're a preacher. We don't do these things to please men, but we do it as if God were our boss. Now think about that for a second. Would that change your work ethic, sitting at your job, working at your whatever you do? Would it change your attitude of work any if you knew God was standing right here beside you? You know, often we use the phrase, God is always watching. But we often think of that, well, that only applies to maybe when I'm thinking about doing something sinful or maybe when I'm off somewhere. But God's watching us while we're working. While we're, again, digging that ditch, while we're plowing that field, while we're driving that truck, while we're teaching those students. Are we doing it heartily as unto the Lord, or are we doing it as, I'm going to do as little as possible to get by, just so I can make sure I get that paycheck at the end of the week? Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10, whatsoever thy hand find to do, do it how? With thy might. With all that you've got, with everything that you are, you put everything you've got into that work that you do. Again, that ditch, that field, that truck, that whatever it is, we do it as best we can. Revelation 22 and verse 12, to give every man according as his work shall be. Now the context of this is the idea of judgment, that God is going to give back to us as our work shows back on that or relates back to what we deserve. So you think about it, how I've worked at my physical job, spiritual things absolutely, but physically as well, that's going to relate upon my eternal soul. That's going to relate upon whether I'm a good steward or not with what God's blessed me with. Again, how would these thoughts change our jobs? Job 34 and verse 11, for the work of a man shall he render unto him. Now, here's the one for me that gives the nail in the coffin, that I've got to be a worker. For the work of a man shall he render unto him. The context of this is whatever I work and I strive for, out of that, I'm going to give back to God. So I'm working so that I can give to God because He's blessed me so much. I work to provide for my family. I work to provide for myself. But I'm also working so that the cause of Christ can be furthered. So that we can support missionaries, so that we can support advertisements that go out, so we can support VBSs to try to bring kids in, so that we can do all of these different things. Keep the building lights on. Those things are supported out of my work, and if I'm being lazy, if I'm expecting somebody else to do it or somebody else to give it to me, how in the world are those things going to get done? How are we going to accomplish for God when we expect others to do for us? We have the command, the instruction as God's people that we are to be people that are working. Not just spiritually, that's a given, but physically so we can provide for ourselves and for God and His people. But also we have instructions given against idleness or laziness. First one, 2 Thessalonians 3, verses 6 through 15. Be turning over there if you would. Second Thessalonians 3, 6 through 15. I'm going to read this one because I'm going to probably stop every so often. 2 Thessalonians 3, 6 through 15. Now we command you, brethren, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you withdraw yourselves from every brother that walketh disorderly and not after the traditions or the teachings which you have received of us. Now think about this passage first of all, then we'll see the context that it falls into. You separate yourself from everyone that walketh disorderly. Now, I don't know about you, when I hear that phrase, walketh disorderly, what comes to my mind, adultery, sin, theft, murderers, rapists, that kind of thing. the people that walk disorderly, right? But listen to the context. We separate ourselves from these people that walk disorderly. For you yourselves know how you ought to follow us, for we have behaved not ourselves disorderly among you. He's saying when we came to you, we didn't act this way. We didn't act in the disorderly manner. Neither did we. Now here's the context. Here's the illustration for that disorderly thing. Verse 8, neither did we eat any man's bread for naught, but we wrought with our labor and travailed night and day that we might not be chargeable to any of you, not because we have not power, but to make ourselves an example unto you to follow us. So here's the disorderly thing he was saying. When we came to you, we didn't act this way. We worked so that we could feed ourselves. Now think about it. Here's the preacher saying, or this traveling missionary coming, I came to you to preach and to teach to you, but I'm going to go out and I'm going to keep my day job so that I can keep doing this. So that you're not going to say I came here essentially just to get paid or get some money or to get something from you. I came, I taught you the gospel, I worked so that I could feed myself so that you could see in me a good example, how not to walk disorderly. So again, our minds, we see that disorderly as those bad, sinful things, but here it's in the context of expecting others to feed you, not working for your own milk, not laboring yourself. Continuing on in verse 10 now, for even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. For we hear that there are some among you which, here's our phrase, walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. Now them that are such we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ, that with quietness they work and eat their own bread. Here's that disorderly thing. Again, not those big sinful things, but you make sure they work so they can eat of themselves, not being busybodies, not worrying about other people's lives, not getting into other people's business, but with quietness, they can take care of themselves. Again, here's this big verse, this big passage, and it's dealing all with the idea, let a person work to feed themselves. If they're not going to work, don't let them eat. Don't let them get away with leeching off the rest of you who are working to feed yourselves. But separate yourselves from them. Again, go back to verse 6 there. Withdraw. We've got to realize that God here, He's wanting us to separate ourselves from those lazy people. Again, not those people that can't provide for themselves, but those people that are taking advantage of the ones that are working. He was saying, Paul here, I was out working to be a good example to you. Not because I couldn't have gotten something from you since I was teaching to you. God expects His laborers to be paid from those that they're laboring among. But He's saying, I worked so that you could see an example of somebody that's working as well. But now I'm hearing that you're following after this pattern or falling into this way of some of you not working. Whose pattern are we going to follow? That of Paul or those that are walking disorderly? Next, Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Here we're shown a very small animal, but one that should, again, impact our attitude toward this. Go to the ant, or look to the ant, you sluggard, you lazy person. Consider her ways and be wise. You look at what the ant's doing and you follow after the example of her. Which having no guide, overseer, ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, gathereth her food in the harvest. Works while there's time to work so that there'll be enough left when there's bad times. You lazy person, you look toward that little ant who doesn't have a guide, who doesn't have somebody to tell it what to do, and yet it can provide for itself. We should be doing the same things. We've got to realize that a Christian, we have a responsibility to ourselves and to God to do what we are able to do and not expect others just to give these things to us. The standard is given in the Scriptures, and it's the thought that we have to make the best use of our time by having this mind to work, as we read in Nehemiah. Understanding that I am going to give an account to God of what I have done, not just spiritually, that absolutely, but with my hands, with my mind, my ability to work, help others, help God. I'm going to have to give an account of those opportunities and time toward God. Are we living up to that standard? Are we living up to that opportunity that God is placing before us? Or going back to our last point, somebody else is going to do it. Somebody else give me. But lastly, I want us to look at this thought of when does this desire to work, this desire to earn, when does it cross the line into what we call now as materialism? When it gets to the idea, I'm not working for a cause, but I'm working just to gain. Some take verses such as Mark chapter 10, verses 23 and 25, and they'll go to those verses and they'll say, read this, and Jesus looked around about and saith unto his disciples, how hardly shall they that have riches enter into the kingdom of God? It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. They'll go to verses like these and many others, and they'll say, see there, being rich is a bad thing. Having money and having wealth and having riches and material goods, that's a sinful thing. But what these people do, for whatever reason is, they'll skip over that middle verse or they'll skip over other verses. Here's verse 24 that was right in the middle of those two verses. And the disciples were astonished at his word. Again, like many would be, riches is an evil thing. And the disciples were astonished at his word, but Jesus answereth again and said to them, children, how hard is it for them that trust in riches to enter into the kingdom of God? There's the key to it. It's not the riches that's bad. It's not the working to earn a living that's bad. It's that trusting in them. It's when I start saying, okay, I want more money because with more money I'll never have to worry about a thing. It's saying I want those bigger and better things because that's just what I want. I'm not going to worry about my spiritual things anymore. I'm going to build up my bank account to this point. But think about what 1 Timothy 6 verse 10 says. Again, most people will take this passage and they'll even take it out of context and remove a verse that's there or a word that's there. How many of you have heard for money is the root of all evil? You've heard that phrase before? Is that what the passage says? It's the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It's the love that's wrong. It's the love of that money that leads to these evil things. The money in and of itself is just an arbitrary thing. It's like this bench that's sitting here. It's not going to do anything good or it's not going to do anything evil as it is. But it's the intent and the thoughts and the mind using it that would cause it to be evil. The love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they loved it enough, they're coveting after this thing, they have erred from the faith, pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Because they love money, they left God. Because they've loved money, they've thrown away their family, or they've done things that are unethical and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Because they've started trusting in God, they've started trusting in money, stopped trusting in God, started trusting in money, those things, those material goods, they're causing their own selves pain. We've got to realize that there is nothing wrong with having a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with making a lot of money. But it's what I decide to do with it or how I let it take over my life that shows that. Jesus often spoke about money or material goods in his ministry. About 1/6 of the Gospels contains something having to do with money or material things, where he's speaking about how to either use something or he's speaking about the things that we've been blessed with by God. And even 1/3 of the parables deal with this aspect of material goods. Just a short example of that, Luke chapter 20 and verse 25, part of the Gospels. And he said unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things which be Caesar's, and unto God the things which be God's. Pay your taxes. But you also make sure God's not left out of that. You take your money and you do what you're supposed to do with it. But then we have a parable here, Luke chapter 12, verse 18. And he said, this I will do, I will pull down my barns, build greater ones, and there will I bestow all my fruits and goods. In this thought, he's giving us a parable about a man who's trusting in his riches. I've got what I need to survive, but now I'm going to make sure I keep what I've got, tear down my barns, build up bigger ones, and then fill them up. Most of the New Testament, or a great deal of the New Testament, deals with how we as Christians don't use how we think about our physical possessions. But there's that line to be crossed. And where is it? There's a big distinction, again, that has to be made between having money and having this mind of materialism. Turn over now, if you would, Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, we're going to start with verse 19, go down through verse 24 here. And again, as I've said, I think with each of the topics, here's this one passage that kind of deals with all of it. Matthew chapter 6, starting with verse 19. Somebody would go ahead and read those verses, and then we'll talk about them in a second. All right. Again, here's one of those passages that I'm sure you've read this before, haven't you? Preached on it before? Bible class teachers, well, they're not in here, but I'm sure they've taught on it before. But here's one of those things that shows us exactly the distinguishing line. Was that a bell I heard? Does that mean I've got 5 minutes? Okay. All right, well, I have about 30 more slides left. I'm kidding. But here we have this thought. First of all, verse 19, the simple thought there. Don't focus on physical goods. Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth. Don't focus or don't worry about these things on the earth because they're going to rust, because they're going to fall away. How many of you have bought a new car recently, let's say within the past 2 or 3 years? You had to have some oil changes on it? Had to change a few tires? Maybe a rod got broken? Or they break down, right? It was brand new a year ago, 2 years ago, but now it's wearing down. Don't focus on these things because they rot, they fall apart, they fall away. Verses 20 through 21, focus on the things in heaven. If I'm laying up for myself treasures in heaven, guess what's not going to happen to it? No thief can get there, no rust there, not going to break apart, it's not going to disintegrate. You're looking for a good investment plan? Here's the best one you can have. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Verses 22 through 23, where it talks about if your eye is evil or if part of the body, it's the thought, don't let the world and its thoughts and its good blind you from what we should be doing. You're at work, you're sitting at that desk, or you're driving to that place. Well, if I work a little bit more overtime, or if I maybe put in 10 more years, I can get promoted, and then I might have to work Sundays and Wednesdays and all this and that. We're not focused on that. I'm not saying we're not trying to gain or we're not trying to get promoted, but my mind is on what can I do for God. If getting this promotion or getting this other job is going to take away from my ability to serve God, then I might need to say I might be crossing this line. If I'm putting things above God, money, material possessions, in a place that God deserves. Then that last verse there, again, one of these verses that's used countless times. You can't serve two masters. You can't serve God and you can't serve money. You can't straddle the fence when it comes to this thought. I can't say, well, okay, on this one hand, I'm going to be working for God, but on this other hand, I'm going to do my best or do everything possible that I can to make myself rich and powerful or have that bigger house, that bigger car. It's either you're serving God and those things may come or they may not. Who cares? The thought here, well, I think I ended it with it, so we'll skip on down to that. This phrase here by Kent Hughes, author, he's got some religious stuff out, but the thought is God can have our money and not our hearts. How many of you have before, maybe you know of somebody, they've given on Sunday, put in the collection plate, but you know from their actions they're not a faithful Christian. I can give God something of my physical self, but I've got to realize if God's got me completely, if I am a follower of Christ, He's going to have my money. He's going to have those physical possessions. We've got to realize we cannot straddle that fence. It's either we're standing with God or we're standing with money and physical goods. Now, if I'm on this side, God's got the rest of it. But we have to realize that the line of materialism is crossed when my goal becomes, when my focus becomes things, money, possessions versus God. Again, nothing wrong with being rich or being wealthy or being successful in life. But when I start saying I'm going to take this over God, I'm going to start focusing on this, and it could be money or it could be anything, whatever you want to put there, then I've crossed that line of trying to serve two masters. We've got to realize our goal in life is to make it to heaven, not to make enough or make as much money as we can here. Not a bad thing, but that's not my goal. Am I laying up treasures in heaven? Am I laying up for myself when I go to eternity? Or am I like that parable that we talked about, that person I'm building or tearing down my barns in order to build bigger ones to fill them up? What is your focus in life? What is our purpose in this? You see, the work ethic of a Christian should be a very important thing to us, because it shows not just how I am focused on the physical, but that work ethic. Well, I thought I'd get it right by the end, but I haven't. The work ethic of a Christian shows my dedication to my following of God. Is that the last bell? Okay. We've got to realize that Christians, God's people, man in general, is a being that is created to work. We've got to realize that we cannot be lazy and idle, expect handouts, have that give me attitude, and expect to be right with God. I can have this attitude, but I can't have this attitude and be a Christian truly and honestly. We've got to realize that we as Christians should have a mentality of we're working hardly. We have that mind that's ready to work. That like those in Nehemiah, I might be building or working with one hand, and the other hand I'm holding a sword to fight off whatever may come. We have to realize that we cannot allow money, things, possession to be the focus of our life. As Christians, what's your goal? It's not a rhetorical question, I'm really asking. As Christians, what's your goal? Make it to heaven. Now, a new car would be great, wouldn't it? If you saw me, I drove up in a minivan. We have two of them now. I would rather have a truck. I'd rather have it. But I can't take it with me. I mean, my other van, my work van, as Kim calls it, it works good for me. I've been able to carry some lumber, carry some big items in it. It's fine for what it's worth. I'd rather have something, but I realize I'm not going to take it with me. That bigger house, that bigger car, that bigger bank account, what do these things matter? If I'm using them for God, then it doesn't. If I'm focused on heaven and making it there, then these things are going to come, and that's great. Or they won't come. That's fine too. We've got to realize, though, that as a Christian, I have to have that mind to work and be willing and able and ready to serve and to live for God. Not expect the world to give me, but expect to live for God, so that when I stand before Him on the day of judgment, He can say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Go back to that parable of the talents. That He can look to my life, the spiritual things, absolutely, but He can look to the things of me as a steward of His goods, His riches, His possessions, and He can see somebody that did their best to try to make those things work for Him. Not that I was spending it on all these other things just to gain and gain and gain. But He can see that well done, or that good and faithful servant. So tonight, the question I leave to you is, what is your Christian work ethic? What are you working for? What are you living for? What was our song of invitation? 9:35? 9:39. So if you wouldn't get that ready, and if you need the help, prayers of this congregation anyway, if you need to make yourself right with God, tonight, now is the time to do it.
Thank you, Jesse, for that message. I was, as we were going through those verses, you touched on it, but Ephesians 4:28, let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he has extra, that he may have something to give him who has need. And again, just as a reminder of what's the positive of working hard and having extra is to help other people. So anyway, that was what came to my mind. Thank you for that message tonight. We appreciate it. Joe Wilson's going to say our closing prayer. Hold on one second. Remember to register your kids for VBS and keep them off the stage. Thank you.